morning. Welcome to Flyte's a Fancy, and this is just a little sit in the garden by the pond for a talk through the various types of feeders and drinkers that we do, because there's such a confusing array. Just thought we'd give you a little illustration of some of the types that we've got. We'll start off with the traditional plastic, as you were, tube feeders. This is a tube feeder, carefully designed, small legs to hold it off the ground, stop the birds scraping muck and mess into it. There's a grid around the bottom because chickens love to hunt around in their food and pick out the golden grain and throw the rest on the floor. Also, we have a removable, he says, a removable lid. This acts as weather protection. Also, inside, carefully demounted on this one, is a bar. It just pops in there, he says, pops in there. Like so. So you can hang the feeder. So if, for example, you've got a mobile house, you can move it with the house, or if you're feeding inside a larger house, you can suspend it from the ceiling, and therefore, if there are any sort of rodents or anything like that running around, then they can't get to your feed. Doesn't mean that you can avoid normal house hygiene, though. You've still got to make sure there's no food lying around. So you can take it to bits for easy cleaning. And that top just pops back on there, like so. Now, that's a small version. We have a larger version here. This is the Plenum Feeder, a larger version of the Ascot. This will take 6 kilograms, so if you've got 20 or 12 birds, this will do you just fine. Half a dozen birds, just half a fillet. Very, very good rain protection, as you can see, and also still a hanging point, so you can hang it up. The legs stop the birds scraping the food in, and a grid around the bottom to stop them throwing it around. The weather protection is very good on this. You may think that your birds won't be able to get in there, but chickens, like husbands, are driven by food, and they'll get in there, don't worry. You can buy economy versions. So for example, if you were feeding undercover or in a house, you can buy this sort of feeder. It's literally just a base and a top, and the two pressed together. So the base has a grid on it, so that the feed comes out, but there's no grid around to stop the birds scattering the feed. And when you do this feeder, you top that up with feed, and then you put the base on like that, give it a good push, turn it up the other way, and then the feed will come out around there. You can easily see how much feed is left, but this is an economy feeder, and as such isn't as robust or as refined as this sort of method of feeding, and also no weather protection on the top. So of course this is indoors only, or outdoors in the summer, which we've got here today. Tube feeders, sort of mid-range. That's the top of the range, that's the bottom of the range. Sort of mid-range is this sort of tube feeder here. Again, can be hung from the little hangy bit on the top there. This is a 3 kilogram feeder, so if you've got half a dozen birds, that'll do you really nicely. This is a more old-fashioned type of tube feeder, superseded by this type of design. You can adjust the height between the tube and the base by just altering the wing nut there, which alters the amount of feed that comes out. There is also a weather protection that you can put on the top of this. Not as good a weather protection as the Ascot or the Blenheim, but it does work. Okay, just brought a slightly larger version of the mid-range tube feeder there. As you can see, exactly the same animal, but taller. Therefore that will hold 6 kilograms, which is the same quantity as the Blenheim feeder. You can see the difference in the design. This is just a more modern design. Also, in the economy feeders, again, varying sizes, but exactly the same method. Just the top, fill the top up, put the bottom on it like that, and it's there for your birds. These sort of economy feeders are very good for if you've got young birds growing up in a small house or in a run, where you can put them under cover. They're easily topped up, and you're not going to spend a lot of money for a feeder that you're going to use occasionally. Right, the next type of gravity-fed tube feeders that we use are the old-fashioned traditional galvanized, which are very, very popular with some owners. They're very good. They are very, very easy to operate. This is a galvanized 2.5 kilogram feeder. The top comes off by rotating it either clockwise or anti-clockwise, depending on which make it is and which person built this particular one, because they do vary as to where they put the cleats underneath. As you can see, very shiny, also used in medieval jousting or party hats. The feed goes in the tube in the middle, and there is an adjuster where you can adjust the height of the tube to adjust the flow of the feed into the trough in the bottom. Now, as you can see with this type of tube feeder, there's no grid around the bottom to prevent the birds pecking the food all over the place and having little throwing corn games, but they do last a long time, they're very robust, and they do tend not to get blown over in anything but the worst of weather. Like I say, took the top on, there we go, 2.5 kilogram tube feeder, galvanized version. This is a 7 kilogram version of the same type of animal. Again, turn the top, lid comes off, and there's an adjuster in the middle. He says turn it the right way, and it comes up, and that adjusts the height of the tube to the base. Tighten it up, put the top back on, turn it the right way. This one was obviously built by Brian, not Sid. And there we go, 7 kilogram galvanized feeder. They come with weather protection like those, or this is a galvanized tube feeder in the Brittany range. This is mainly for indoor feeding, as you can see. It can be hung by the strong clip on the top there. The feed comes down the tube and into the pan at the bottom, where there is a wire grid to stop the birds throwing it everywhere. So, and also more of a return on the tray around the bottom, so there's a lot less chance of the birds flicking the food all over the house, which of course is an encouragement to rats. And to take the top off, he says, hopefully, you do that. There we are, inside one large galvanized tube feeder. That would easily feed 20 birds. We go bigger, yes, and this is not something from Thunderbirds, the good standard Thunderbird 1. This is a 16 kilogram tube feeder. Now, this type of feeder traditionally used for what they call broiler chickens, so chickens for the meat industry, whether they're being kept free range outdoors or whatever, but some people do use them if they've got large flocks. It gives the ability to put the best part of a sack of feed in a tube feeder. Very good weather protection. So I would suggest standing it up on some bricks or a block just to get the base a little bit higher off the ground. The top comes off easily, like that. Just one very big tube feeder. As you can see, there we are. Doubles as a rocket launcher. On top, there's forgetting. Just pops back on like that. That is a semi-agricultural implement really, but does the job very well. Right, the last type of plastic feeder that needs a mention is the VEC Wise feeder. Now this type of feeder is designed to either be screwed to a wall with a removable bracket, so you can of course take it off to top it up, so that bracket gets fixed to a wall and then the feeder gets attached to the bracket. Top it up with feed through the lid there. This will take 5 kilograms. It's then got nice weather protection. The birds just come up and peck away inside there. It's got a grid to stop the feed being thrown everywhere. Bit of natty design with this one. There's some little buttons that you turn here, and there's a shield inside that slides down to adjust the rate of flow of feed. So you can lower the level of the feed in the pan in the bottom. So if you've got some really messy birds, and some of them really are, you can put just a very small amount of feed in the bottom of the pan, and that really helps prevent mess, which, as most poultry keepers tell you, chickens do like to throw their food. They're a bit like rugby players at the annual dance. They will throw food everywhere. This type of feeder also comes with a variety of little brackets, these type of things, that clip into the side of the feeder, which enable you to put it on the side of a wire run or pen or fence. At various angles. It can be mounted onto wire that's at various angles, which is really handy, especially if you're using the typical triangular arcs or that sort of thing. That gives you a fairly weatherproof and reasonably large feeder to be able to use in those. There's a 5 kilogram extension which just slides on the top as a cartridge, which makes that then a 10 kilogram feeder, and you put extra brackets on it to support that sort of weight. Very good feeder. Just as an extension to the galvanized type of feeders, we have here a very small part of our Brittany range of hanging galvanized feeders. Now these are excellent in a small run with bantams, that sort of thing. There is a larger version as well, which is a 3 kilogram one, which is very good just for hanging inside a mobile run or a mobile arc, because you've got the weather protection there. We've sold a lot of these feeders actually as wild bird feeders. They're sort of slightly architectural, they're a little bit quirky, but very solid. They work well. So that's the Brittany hanging outdoor feeders. That's a 1.5 kilo, and then there's a 3 kilo as well. Moving on from tube feeders, many people like to feed their birds scraps or layers mash as a sort of muesli form. And birds are awake. In a trough. Chicken troughs are a fairly traditional way of feeding birds. They come in many sizes, normally in galvanized. Galvanized is a good way to do it. They're quite heavy, they tend not to get thrown away. Chickens do like to stand in their food, which is slightly idiosyncratic, but you just size the trough for the number of birds that you've got. If you're feeding layers mash, you can feed it either dry or moist. Also very good for feeding ducks. Ducks are messy birds. They do make an absolute state when they're feeding, but these have got a nice return on the edge, which helps stop the food getting thrown everywhere. Also, of course, with ducks, you can use these for putting liquid in, put water in. It's quite a useful duck drinker. It's a little bit more difficult for them to stand in. Now, working on the principle of the basic trough, it's been improved to stop the birds treading in the food as much, and what we come up with is the type of trough that we've got in the Brittany range here, with a rotating bar on the top. Again, a lovely return on the top of the trough to stop the feed being thrown everywhere, and if the birds try and stand on there, the bar rotates. They don't like that, so they don't stand on it, which means that you don't tend to get them walking in the feed, and of course where a bird walks, it poos. Which is not good. Right, now when you've got small birds, chicks, they need feeding obviously, and they've got special requirements. You really don't want them walking around in the feed, and they need a low lip, and you only need to put a small amount of food in at one time, otherwise they'll make a mess in it, it'll go stale, and before you know it you'll have infection within your young birds, and they are quite fragile. So we go from the basic plastic chick trough. It's small, obviously, quite low. I mean, this would do you for 20 chicks easily. It's got a nice grid on the top, which does open up, like with these little plastic clips, so that you can take the whole thing to bits for easy cleaning. Because cleanliness is very important when you've got young birds. Right, this type of chick feeder doesn't have to be very robust. The birds aren't going to damage it at all, and of course you're only using it for short periods of time, so you'll be using it for a few weeks and then putting it away for months before you have another breed of chicks. So that's the basic chick trough. We also use this type, which is a tube feeder for chicks, based on a plastic jar. Top the jar up with feed, put the bottom on, comes down like that. It's a round grid feeder. The feed comes into the bottom, the chicks poke their heads through like that. great thing with this is they really can't walk in the feed and make a mess in it. So it's very good for preventing cross-contamination of feed with chick poo, which is great. We come back to the very basic feeders again, the economy feeders, ideal for chicks. On this one, this is a slightly larger economy. They do an even smaller one with an even lower lip. This would be fine for chicks of a couple of weeks old. Younger, then you'd probably be better off using a saucer or one of these very, very tiny feeders. So that's chick feeders. The ultimate crow protection. This machine is a galvanized treadle feeder, and this will stop the crows coming down and mobbing your tube feeders out in the field or the garden, wherever you are. And it's also a very good help to prevent any rodents being around. It works by topping up the feed. This is a 10 kilogram treadle feeder, so it will take 10 kilograms of layers pellets. So you pop the feed in there, pop the top back on. It's good and weatherproof. It's quite heavy, so it's not going to blow over. And it's worked by the birds treading on the treadle, which opens up a flap inside, exposing the trough of feed. And the birds then stand on the treadle and feed from the trough. Now, because the chicken's quite heavy, it can operate the treadle and open up the feed. A crow isn't heavy enough, even a fat one. You can get 5 or 6 of them gang together, but they're not very good team players. So eventually they give up on that one, and so it's just the chickens that can operate it. Slight drawback with this is if you've got bantams, of course, they might not be heavy enough to operate the treadle. So you can do one of two things. You can either put a suitably weighted stone on there so it nearly opens, and then when your bantam steps on it, it does, yeah? Or use one of the other types of feeders. There's not a grid in the bottom of that trough, so sometimes they can throw the food around a little bit. But it's a large feeder. The birds can be left with it unattended, just to help themselves, and it really does stop crows. This is our prime anti-crow device. Right, one other thing that you need to think about is feed storage. Obviously, you need somewhere to put it, and this is a galvanized feed bin from the Brittany range again that we sell, and works very simply. It's a bin. Push that bar down, it locks the lid on. In order to release it, you just do that, and the lid is retained so it doesn't get blown away in the wind. And you've got a nice big bin there to put your corn or your pellets in, and this of course can be left out outside. Being heavily galvanized, zinc plated, it's not going to rust on you or let water or rats in. And then put the lid on. There we go, good, safe and secure for your feed. Well, thanks for joining us here at Flytes of Fancy for a talk through of all the different feeders and drinkers that we sell and you can buy for your poultry and waterfowl. Obviously there's a wide variety, and I just hope we've managed to give you something to help you make your mind up when you purchase. Thanks a lot for your time. Bye bye.